Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next guest for our board certification tip video is Jacksonville attorney Jay Henderlite. Jay, are you with us?
I'm with you. Thanks for having me.
Jay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Jay has been an attorney here in Florida since 2011. Started off as a public defender. And Jay, when did you dabble into family, or when did you accept this is something you wanted to do?
Valentine's Day 2015.
How romantic. Is there a story behind that?
There isn't, but it's ironically the day I started my family law career.
It's you have a heart, so that's perfect. And it took you a couple years to get board certified, so that was really quick. You know, if you chose it, you know, in 14 and now it's 23 and you're certified, I'd say you did a good job and you took it pretty seriously.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So we chatted a little bit before we hit record, and I asked you how you found out, and you said by email. And I guess since then your life has been pretty good. I had the honeymoon.
Yeah, it was a fun surprise because it said they were going to mail the results, and I'd heard from prior test takers that they were notified around Memorial Day. But
yeah,
I actually was in the middle of a client consultation, and they had sent me something, and I wanted to look and see if it had gone into my clutter, and it hadn't, but that's where I found
so it went to your junk folder.
It went to clutter on Outlook.
So thank goodness you looked, right? And when you saw that, did you have to stop the appointment?
No, I kept my cool, but
really, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So cool story. So most people are like afraid to take the board cert exam just because the number of people who apply to take it, there's usually not a big passage rate. This year, 9 people passed. I don't know how many people sat for it yet, but what were you thinking when you were doing the application process?
I don't know if I was afraid to take it so much as I didn't want to do the work necessarily, just because I have other things going on. But I did want to get board certified, and I thought about applying. Actually, I started the application last year to take it in 22, but I just procrastinated too long, I think. But I met with all of the local attorneys that have been board certified, or at least have passed the test in the last 3 or 4 years, and kind of got their input about what they did and what they recommended that I do to get ready, and I just followed their lead.
So what were those valuable recommendations?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was start early. I didn't start as early as people apparently, but I wanted to have all my outlines done, at least outlines from the red books from the prior year, done before cert review in January, so I could just supplement them with what was new or what was different or what I might have missed. And I mostly did that. There were 1 or 2 I was outlining on Thursday between the day I got there for the tips and nibbles and the first day, but I got pretty close.
How many hours would you say you put in before board cert?
So in watching your prior videos, I've heard people say 300. What I heard from my local contacts was 100, which seemed more palatable. I probably did 100 plus, less than 150, but I don't know. I didn't keep track of it.
Some people keep track like they're billing a case.
Yeah, I don't.
That might depress
bill
me.
hours. I mean, I know that's what I have to do, but I'm not going to do it if I don't have to.
So now that you have taken the test and you know that you passed it, do you think it was fair?
I do. I think it was fair. It's a hard test just in the sense that you have to know a lot, and not only know it, but be able to recall it. And it's a lot of things that in practice you don't need to know off the top of your head. But having gone through the process and learned all the information that I learned, it made me far smarter and more knowledgeable as a practitioner than I've ever been before. And if the point of the test is to become an expert, you know, it really did that, because, you know, I personally knew but that my knowledge of family law and my ability to recall cases, apply rules, just practice at a high level is a lot higher now than it was, say, in January of this year, just because of all the studying.
Yeah, and that's a benefit you get whether or not you pass or not. And a lot of folks that seem to have anxiety about the test, they're going to be a better lawyer if they just buckle down and go through the process, whether they pass or not. And I don't think I was ever as smart as I was the year I passed board certification. And then I
That's
did
really
the
true. And people, I think, focus a lot on the test and whether or not it's really a test to for knowledge, or if it's a test to kind of weed out those that didn't study enough. And I think that kind of misses the point. The point is, if you want to hold yourself out as an expert, then you need to really buckle down and focus hard on all of the different components and nuances of practice family law. And the only way to really do that is, at least in my mind, is to prepare for something like that.
Sure. And the amount of memorization that's required, especially, like alimony factors and, how would you get that in your head where you could just recite them? Did you use like phonics or some type of system?
Yeah, I did two things. I did mnemonics for all the factors, but then I also did some online note cards just to kind of help me.
I'm a big note card guy.
So, that was sort of phase one, but I think the one thing I did that saved me probably a lot of time is I realized if I was just going to study note cards and just try to go over in my mind and memorize or say out loud the factors or whatever, that was going to take me a really long time. So I ended up writing a bunch of hypotheticals and going, I think Fox Miller had said something that board cert about, this is how they get you. And so I wanted to think, what could the possible sort of traps be, or the, hypothetical questions they might ask that are sort of tricky. So if I uncover them and then gear essays toward them, that would help me, one, learn the things that I think they're going to test on, and then two, help me just with my memorization, because I'm just practicing answers. I'm going to learn it faster than just sort of saying them out loud from note cards.
Yeah, just the act of writing an outline on a subject helps me memorize it. And, every month I go through all these published opinions and I write out, the holding of the case. And just by doing that, it forces this material to stick in my head. So you looked at the board cert books. How did you get a hold of the core and the subcore areas? How did you know? Did you just rely on the red books, or like what other materials did you use?
Well, I started with red books from 22 board cert review course and outlined those. And then when I got to the 2023 review course, I did outlines based on presentations and then what was new, just sort of supplemented. And then I got the green books from Florida Law Weekly and read those, did kind of what you just said, read out the case name and the holding for the cases that I thought they would test on, and if they were interesting facts, I wrote one or two words so I would associate that case with that set of facts. I'd heard them say that you don't need case names, but if you put case names in, it may get you an extra point. And I'm pretty good at remembering stuff like that, so I figured that would be an easier way to get a point.
Yeah, but if you get it wrong,
studying more obscure areas of law that they might test on, but it may not be that beneficial to me.
When you were approaching the test, where'd you take it? Tampa?
No, I took it right here.
In Jacksonville. Was it at a hotel?
No, it was at my desk.
Oh, that's a lot different. So you had a proctor watching you at your desk.
Right.
And so you have your camera activated, and are you allowed to leave the screen? What's the etiquette like for that?
I don't think so. I mean, you have to stay looking forward. I remember once I was thinking about an answer and I felt my eyes water, and I went back and said,
you get paranoid.
Right. But they didn't say anything. But, there really is kind of a time crunch, at least there was for me. So I was really focused on getting the answers on paper, getting them written. So I didn't really have time to worry about looking around or moving up or anything like that.
So you pretty much used all the time that was allocated.
I did. I heard somebody say that the first time they took it, they had a lot of extra time and they felt they did well, and then they went and looked and realized they missed a lot of things. And so if you're finished early, you're probably missing something.
I finished early, and then you have this whole second guessing and reviewing, and usually your gut is, for me, my gut is usually right, and if I think about something, I usually talk myself out of the right answer. So I was kind of tortured having some extra time because I didn't know what I should do. So
I didn't have a lot of extra time anyway. I did have enough time, I think, for most of the sections to kind of go back and look. And there were a few times I would add in what I'd already done. But I don't remember rewriting an answer. I do remember, I forget which question it was, but I wanted to add a line or something about not unless the wife has received substantial assets, but it ended right when I was typing. So it ended with not unless the wife has received substantial ass. Hoping that made somebody laugh.
Some implants or something. You got to come down to South Florida. That's where it's like a reality here.
Right.
Welcome to Miami. So like, is this something you would recommend to other people to do? And if so, why?
Absolutely. I mean, I think more than anything, what I got out of it was it made me a better lawyer, a better practitioner. Just forced me to really learn all of the aspects of our area of practice. There are a lot of lawyers, and I used to be one of them, where you know enough to be dangerous, and what you didn't know, you go and look it up and pull cases, and that's all fine. And a lot of people are successful doing that, but there were a lot of things that I thought I knew that I didn't actually know, or I wasn't doing correctly. A lot of rules that are useful to know and implement. And also there are a lot of things that other people do, or that the judges sort of accept as status quo, that aren't really what we're supposed to be doing.
And things always change. It's
And
rules
things
are
always change.
My board cert test probably looked a lot different than yours.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next year.
But I did mine in a blue book. So that's when they summoned us to one location in Florida, and we all sat and they mixed us with other people, other board certification sections. So the person next to you wasn't taking your test. So there's no cheating opportunity. And back then, typing on computers was a new thing. And people were scared of that because their computers were getting locked up. So I did my board cert test in blue books, like law school, but that was back in 2004. So it's been a couple of years, and technology, and now look at what Zoom has done to our industry and electronic filing, and there's so much change happening. But the test is still hard, and there is still kind of a low passage rate. So the fact that you made it on your first time, huge kudos to you, Jay. Good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So
I think I wouldn't make it on my first try. I totally expected to.
Yeah, that's like a good expectation to have, that you're just doing this to learn the test. That's what I did, and I was surprised to pass it my first time too. And I had the benefit, I was 5 years out of law school when I took it. So having that board cert really helped establish myself. So not only do you have to pay more in your malpractice insurance, but you get some benefits too. Have you seen those benefits? Is your phone ringing a little more yet?
Yeah, I don't know if it is or isn't. I mean, it's only been
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Well, I did see your website, and you do have everything properly branded. So
To do that.
but you earned this. So congratulations, Jay. Any other tips you can think of that might be helpful to folks thinking of taking this exam coming up or sometime in the future?
One big thing I'd say is just know yourself and trust yourself, because a lot of people will give you different expectations about how many hours you need to study, or
yeah, 300. I did not study 300 hours.
But to me, 300 it wouldn't have been worth it. And even if I did 100 one year and didn't pass it, then I'd already had the outlines done. I can do 50 the next year. So I'm a big fan of working smarter rather than harder, just because.
Yeah, but everybody has their
I like having
way. Everybody has
Exactly.
their way of learning too. So
And of course, people also sort of like to, I think, humble brag a little bit. Like, I studied 300 hours, which is great for them.
I don't think that's a brag. You know, I went into the mountains, locked myself in a cabin, and came out 3 months later.
But the point is, it doesn't have to be something completely crazy. I mean, I didn't lose really any revenue when I was studying. I was studying weekends, and I did have a 4-day trial that ended up getting continued, which was good. So I had some extra time that entire week to kind of study and supplement. But it was doable. It wasn't the most fun I've ever had in my life, and there are probably things I would rather have been doing, but it was worth it. And I definitely got a solid return on the time I invested.
Do you want to give us?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom. And again, congratulations on this epic career achievement.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
All right, now we have our next guest, Brittany Pinson out of Tampa, and she works with the Sessoms Law Group. Brittany, you there?
I am.
Congratulations. And not only did Brittany just pass the exam, but she passed it as quickly as an attorney could possibly pass this test, because you got to be an attorney for 5 years. You have to have so many trials. And Brittany got it on her 6th year, which is literally as quickly as you go. So Brittany, you are in a very, not only are you board certified and got this awesome recognition, but only a few people have done it as quickly as you have. So congratulations.
Thanks. I saw no reason to wait, and I was thrilled I passed the first time.
Yeah, it's nice to just get that out of the way. So we're going to talk about like how you approach studying, and I bet there were some things that you did that are probably not like the normal, because you rocketed to the front of the line. So how'd you approach this, Brittany?
So I thought pretty hard about, back when I was in law school, what worked for me, how do I learn best? It's an extraordinary amount of information that you have to retain. So I kind of broke it down into 2 ways, if you will. First, in law school, I hand wrote all of my notes. I did not tape them. So I thought, why change what works? And so I made a very long outline based on the cert review books that you get at the January course. And I hand wrote that the entire thing. So that was how I started. I just went topic by topic. I also got the books from 2022 and 2021 when I was doing this, because 2023 wasn't out yet. I actually started in June of 2021 or 2022. So I was actually filling out my application and making edits to it and already starting to study. I didn't submit my application until late August. I was waiting on a couple of final judgments. Actually, I had to reshift what were substantial involvement cases.
B1.
Yes, exactly. Move that around, update the summary. So that was a lot of fun. But I started with both of those books because I noticed that some of the authors were the same, but some were different. And so they approached a topic differently. And so I wanted to make sure I incorporated, 1, all of the information, and 2, sometimes one approach resonated better with me. And so I, looked at both books simultaneously while I was going through making this handwritten outline. I had a big spiral notebook that was 199 pages. And I also had one of the books from, I think it was 2020, when the course did only published materials on annulment, cohabitation, some of these smaller topics that they never present on. And so I made sure that I also included those because they were listed as testable topics, but not something that were in the 2 books I actually looked at when I was doing the outline. So I also had that book separately. We have all of the books in my firm. We get those every year. So that was really valuable to have. Once I got through the written portion, then I switched to typing, and I retyped the whole thing, but this time I put it in my own words instead of just the words I had written out of the actual outline. And I thought that that was helpful because I was typing it. Then I was able to move things around, streamline what I was writing, and that resulted in an 89-page typed outline. I did not double space. I tried to use bullet points a lot, but I wrote a lot of things out. And then that got me through, I would say, November-ish, December, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't burnt out, that I wasn't coming up against holidays, and I knew that I would need to cram a lot of information in a short time, because doing this process really helped me synthesize it and internalize it. But I knew I wasn't ready to take the test at that point because it was just too much information sort of scattered out there. So then in January of 2023, I started doing what I call one sheets and trying to get every topic that was in my outline. I think I had 23 different topics down to just one sheet. So that meant don't write it down if you know it by heart. If you don't know it by heart and it's something that's nuanced, write it down. But be careful and strategic about what you're doing. So then that was how I was spending my time. And then I got to the point where I was just reviewing the one sheets. Prior to the test, I spent an entire weekend rereading very slowly the whole original outline, but also noticing that there had been changes in the law. There had been some updates. And so I also had to say, oh, that's not right. And I was happy that I could pick out that kind of information from even reading my outline from just 6 months ago. And then the day before the test, I actually had a hearing that morning. And then that afternoon, I read fairly quickly through the outline one last time as just, let me make sure I know this, because I would never forgive myself if I just couldn't recall this one little thing. But I did not take any time off for the test other than basically taking the test.
Any chance you know how many hours were devoted to this process?
You know, they asked that in a survey after the test. And the options were like between 50 and 100, 100 to 150, 150 or more. I would say I was spending, when I was doing the actual outline part, about 2.5 to 3 hours every night. And I would do it a couple nights a week based around work schedule and things like that. No weekends at that point. I mean, but over time, I think I would have to say it's at least 100, maybe even more than 150, but I'm just not sure because I had spread it out so much intentionally. But then there was just a lot of time spent, you know, at those last 2 months. It was an extraordinary amount of time after work and on weekends, just making sure that I had every detail nailed down.
So that seems pretty exhaustive. When you took the test, did you feel good about it, or were you freaked out? What was going through your head?
So my initial reaction was I killed it and I would be shocked if I didn't pass. As time passed, and I mean, even just a few days, that faded and I became very paranoid and afraid. I actually woke up one morning and thought, oh my gosh, I didn't write about this on exam 2. I can't believe that. And then I had to rethink about, what did I write? Oh no, I wrote that. Okay, we're good. So I had a couple even freak out moments. And then even once we got into May, you start knowing it's coming, you know, the decision, what happened. The closer it got, the more nervous I got. And I tried to tell myself to hold on to that feeling from March 10th of I killed it, but it was just really hard. So when I read the email that I passed in the middle of the day on May 31st, I started yelling in my office and like jumping up and running around. So
we talked to one person and the email went to his junk folder. Did you?
Oh no.
So he like was looking and discovered it that way. How did you what were you doing when you found out?
Well, so I actually had heard through the grapevine from somebody else in the beginning of May when I was at the AML conference in Orlando that the way they tell you is if you pass, you get your certificate. If you fail, you get a regular letter. And I had previously joked that I wondered if it was going to be like college admissions where you got a big envelope or small envelope. So I was horrified to find out I was actually correct in my joke. So all this time, as it gets closer and closer, every day I'm saying, guys, has the mail come? Guys, has the mail come? No, it hasn't come, right? So then, okay, you know, someone told me it was going to be towards the end of the May. It was taking them longer to grade, but I still think the mail is coming. So May 29th was a Memorial Day holiday. So I come into the office on Tuesday. For sure, I'm going to find out that day. Nothing comes. So then now it's Wednesday, May 31st. I'm actually in a different office than is the address listed on my bar application stuff because we have multiple offices at the firm. So I'd gotten out of the phone console. I was about to go to a hearing and I start scrolling upward through my email. And so I see certification exam passed, the Florida bar. And so I went and clicked on it, but I wasn't expecting it by email. So I still didn't really know what it was, except for I thought I knew what it was. So it was one of those sort of reality versus understanding what you're really seeing.
And how often do you get that kind of adrenaline rush where you learn something so important and something that took so much work to accomplish?
I mean, it does remind me of when I was waiting to see if I passed the bar to even become an attorney, right? Because we had to log on to the Florida Supreme Court website and you were scrolling for your name and looking for a pass, or hoping there was no fail in there. So that was another one. I felt really good about that exam. And when I saw the results, it had been so long. I, again, was jumping up and, screaming, running around the office because I was
Have that
of course
feeling,
at work
yeah.
at that point. So it was really just incredible.
The fire in the belly. How would you compare this to the Florida bar exam?
Harder in the sense of there weren't that many multiple choice. We only had 30 total and they were only 1 point each. And so that made up a very small percentage of your score. And I thought the multiple choice were challenging, but covered a large variety of topics. So I thought that, it really made it worth it that I studied all 23 topics. The rest of the exam, we had 25 short answers, which you don't have on the underlying bar part. I thought those were definitely the hardest. Time constraint, you couldn't go reread things as much. You really had to go more off instinct and just know it right then. And those were 2 points each, so 50 points. So it was obviously more than the multiple choice. And that was more than one essay because each of the essays we had were only 30 points each. And we had 5 of those. And
Or substantive
so,
essays and the ethics essay, right?
yes. And so that was having to write that many essays also was different. I think the bar exam only had 3 essays. And they didn't seem to be on as many topics. It seemed like a singular topic, whereas these essays, I mean, they had focuses, but like essay 2 was, I think they just called it jurisdiction and substantive issues, but it was a fun one with all sort of topics. I would call it potpourri. And the other ones seemed to have, overarching themes, but there was really a lot that you could grasp at. So I thought that was definitely a different, more nuanced approach. But I think it makes sense for what we're testing for versus what you're testing for in the underlying bar exam.
Now that you've passed and you kind of see the other side of the curtain, is there anything you would do differently?
No, and to be honest, when it was getting closer and I was getting worried that I had failed, I literally thought to myself, I do not know what I would do different. And I'm terrified that I might have to do all of this again. My approach from the beginning was do it once, do it right. It's gonna suck, just to be honest, spending hours after work, you work all day, doing that, spending time on the weekends as you get closer to the exam sucks. It just does. But I really told myself, embrace it now and hope that it's worth it. So I can't think of anything else I would have done different.
You work with Mark Sessoms, and he's a big board cert guy. He's, in fact, I think the only attorney I know who's double certified, at least the only attorney I've spoken to and conversed with. How was the firm with you, coming from that type of a firm that really champions this process? Did that help?
So since I met Mark back in 2012, we've been working together in different capacities prior to me being admitted to practice law in Florida in 2016. And so he was always board certified since I knew him. He always had sort of this striving for excellence. And I felt like I've always been that type of person as well. So I think from very early on, I knew I was going to pursue board certification. And so I knew that a lot of hard things came with that, but that ultimately I thought that it was a rewarding goal. I also only really want to take family law cases. And so I thought that also made sense to be able to distinguish myself in that way with clients or potential clients. So to me, it was always something I was going to pursue. And I had shared that with Mark before. So we were in a way counting down to when could I actually apply to even sit for the exam. And he helped me look over my application after I had done all of the written parts of it back in August of 2022. And we sent that off and he was really supportive. He did tell me he never took any time off when he took the board certification exam. And so I did feel a little pressure to do the same, even though everybody pretty much at the TIPS meeting in January 2023 said they took at least a week. Some people took way more time than that. And I was just powering through. So he kind of was somebody I was trying to emulate and how he did things, because I know I don't have children, but he had 2 small children when he was trying to take the test, and he had to work, a full-time job, and he didn't even take time off. So I thought I can do the same thing. I'll see you and raise you on. So he was, very supportive. We went to lunch actually the day after the test, after I took the test, and he was, really interested to hear the stories and just overall supportive. And then he was obviously somebody I shared this with immediately, and he was, so happy for me. Just, you could tell the way he was even talking, he was glowing about it. So to have that pride, not just in the firm, but in me personally, and one of those, we knew you could do it. I heard that a lot. That also made me worried when I failed that, well, what are they going to say now? But fortunately, we don't have to cross that bridge.
Well, I mean, whether you pass or not, this process makes you a better attorney. So
Absolutely.
So congratulations. Tell Mark we said hi. He's an awesome dude. Any other tips you want to share with our listeners, Brittany, before we end this segment? Things that might benefit?
One thing that I thought was really helpful, I took it on the virtual platform. They started that after COVID, actually. So I was able to I actually took it in this actual office, and you have to download a software program. They walk you through all of this stuff, and then you upload the exams. Prior to this, they tell you it's required to do a mock exam. It's, I guess, a board certification exam on a part of it on a completely separate topic. It's not about getting the questions right or wondering what the actual answer is or anything like that, but you are able to go through and figure out all of the features with the program, that then helps you have that sense of familiarity. So once you actually get into each of the exam sections, because it's in 4 separate exam section parts that they release access to at designated times on test day, you can jump right into what's the question, let me find my answer, instead of wondering what this button does or trying to do something the long way when there might be a shortcut to being able to do it. So playing around with the different features, familiarizing yourself with the program, it's kind of like being on autopilot when you're driving a car on a route you've known the whole time. So it's just one less thing to think about, and it lets you focus, I think, on all the information that you're dying to tell the grader because you definitely studied your butt off and are ready to kill the exam.
Well, Brittany, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Congratulations on this epic career achievement. We're all very proud of you, and we can't wait to see what you do with this.
Great, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brittany Pinson.
Good luck.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next guest for our board certification tip seminar is the one and only, hailing from South Florida, Abby Cohen. Abby, are you there?
I am. Hello there.
Congratulations on this epic achievement that you have done. And we're so excited to hear how you approached the test and what tips you may have for our listeners. So can you tell us, like, you've been an attorney, a couple decades. You started family law like about 10, 11 years ago. When did you make the decision to go board cert?
So thank you for having me. And I think this is a great resource and service that you're providing to test takers. So thank you for doing that. I've been an attorney now for 30 years, practicing family law for 11. I had actually qualified to sit for the exam back in 2018. But due to personal and professional time obligations, I just didn't feel that I had the time that was necessary to appropriately study. So I didn't sit for the exam. I went to the tips and nibbles meeting at the board cert, and I had not yet started studying. And that was all it took for me to know that that was not the right choice. This past year, I changed firms and entered an environment that inspired and encouraged me to dig deeper and try harder and to achieve more. And I made the decision to take the leap.
And let's talk about that environment for a second, because you're on a pretty neat, unique environment with Peter and Jeffrey, Gladstone and Weissman, and now Denise and David, the big merger. So I know all of those folks are totally bought into board cert. So when you join the firm, how did they motivate you?
So when I joined the firm, the conversation had already started that continuing and growing and taking the test would be highly encouraged, but it wasn't mandated. But I will tell you for myself, when you join an environment where you are surrounded by great and talented attorneys, it makes you want to go to the next level and not just stay status quo. So it was the environment, it was the people, and the knowledge that I would be fully supported throughout this process. And one of the first tips I have for future test takers is to surround yourself by people who support you doing this. And whether it's members of your firm, your friends, your family, this is a really long and difficult process. There's going to be bad days. You're going to have meltdowns. You're going to question your competency. But having people around you to pull you back up is just so critical. And for me particularly, that person was Jeff. Every time I got inside my own head about whether I had the ability to take the test or I had the ability to be successful at this test, he talked me through it and got me back on track, and probably saved me a lot of time cycling through that on my own. So I think the environment and the people that are around you truly make a difference.
Yeah, I've always tried to hang out with people who are smarter than me, just so I,
Right.
take by osmosis.
They say
And-
you rise to the level around you. So
And-
I agree.
So cool environment. And I know you're a big advocate, start way before January for this test. When did you start in earnest getting yourself ready for board cert?
That's a fair question. And I think for me personally, because I was so far removed from school and studying in academics, I knew that I could not wait until January. So really back to the time when I was completing my application, so August and then into September, the first thing I did was reach out to other board certified attorneys that I know, whether within my firm or outside the firm, and ask them what their process was. When did they start? What did they study? How did they study? Then I enlarged that circle and I reached out to some newly board certified attorneys that I didn't know, because I knew they would have a different experience than someone who had taken it a decade before, particularly those who had taken it remotely. And I, digested all that information and I started to chart my course. So I knew there were a number of things that I wanted to get completed before the board cert review. And what I did was, for me, memorization is a really, handwriting is a memorization tool for me. So I prepared summaries of the last 2 years of the Florida Law Weeklies. I took the red books and I created my own outline from those. I started creating index cards of the pertinent statutes, of the family procedure rules, and just kept growing the body of documents that I would be then evolving to study after the cert review. So it was an ever evolving process. I didn't have myself on a set schedule until after cert review. And then following that, I had a study schedule that I followed.
So
For some of the subcore topics that weren't in any of the red books, I looked into our firm library to see if we had any CLEs or information. Also, as I got closer to the test, I reached out to some other practitioners an accountant that I do work with, and had a few one-on-one mentoring sessions to work me through some of the subject matters that I felt I needed a little bit of a boost on.
You bring up something really important, the core and subcore topics. Now that's published by the board cert committee. What's going to be on the exam, and not all of it is in the red books. Maybe the core subjects are, but some of the subcores don't always find their way into the red books. What did you have to go and hunt down outside of the red books for those? Like what areas did you need to like independently figure out?
I tried to find some CLE materials on those topics, or to the extent that I knew an attorney who practiced in that area, tried to pick their brain a little bit. I did not feel that I put enough time into the subcore, and thank God I don't have to, but if I had to do it again, I think I would devote a little more time to that, because you just don't ever know where they're going to pop their head. You know, it could be embedded in a core essay, or it could be standalone in a question. And another thing that I did, and I will tell you, historically, I was never a fan of mnemonics ever, but my brain just could not memorize the lengthy
13
factors.
alimony factors.
Well, alimony I could do. The time sharing, the relocation, I just couldn't.
Yeah.
So this is again where I kind of reached back into this community of attorneys who they were all so giving of their time and sharing information. And I received their mnemonics for a number of factors. And I would give myself mnemonic tests where I just literally wrote all the initials for all the mnemonics and as quickly as I could filled in the factors. So that was very helpful, knowing that, you know, I would be able to kind of just data dump the factors and then go back in and fill in the substantive.
And I guess your test was all electronic now, remote with proctoring and people watching you. Wow, has that changed? 20 years ago, I went to Tampa and took the test in blue books and hand wrote it, and people were freaked out because they had the computer option, but it was new. And like it took over your computer and locked it up, and people were real nervous. But what did you think of the actual test taking experience? Did it drive you crazy? Were you comfortable with it? How'd you approach it?
So I liked the idea of taking the test remotely and not having to travel and everything that's attendant with that. I made sure that my surroundings were test ready. I hardwired my computer into my modem. I locked pets up. I notified all my neighbors. I made sure my lawn person wasn't coming, like, because I was taking it from home. So I kind of, you know, put all these guardrails in place. I thought it worked really well to have yourself in a comfortable environment. The test itself is so nerve-wracking because of the unknown. So I think, you know, you take away a little bit of the unknown. What's the temperature in the room going to be? You know, what snacks can I bring with me? And just having a little more comfort, I think, helped me.
Were you in PJs and sweatpants, or how were you dressed for it?
I was dressed casually, but comfortably.
Yeah.
So, but it was just nice. It was nice to be in a comfortable environment. One test taking tip that I would give to anyone who's taking the exam remotely is after you've downloaded the software, they give you the opportunity to go in and kind of play around with their features and their settings. And I found that to really be valuable and time saving. I practiced using the different timers, how to use the highlight tool, the bold, the bullet points. You know, you don't have 30 seconds or a minute to spare in this test. So anything that you can do to familiarize yourself and you're just going in and typing, definitely take advantage of that. And
you told me you had a post board cert review study process. What did that look like? More I guess it was more regimented.
It was more regimented. I set aside, as soon as the cert review ended, every morning I got up early. I'm much better in the mornings, set aside a block of time. I would work the regular day. Then I had some time at the end of the day that was set aside for studying. The weekends entirely were dedicated to it. The last week before the exam, I marked myself out on the calendar, and other than answering emails, it was study, study, study. At that point, I took the outlines that I had created from the red book and then started moving them into index cards, because again, now I'm writing again. So it's just another memorization tool. Every time I wrote it, it just clicked a little more.
Right.
And just had things sorted by topic.
And we all have different ways of learning, and it's really interesting to see those in such like an extreme test like board cert. I've never taken anything like this test, just the volume of information you have to know, and seeing how everybody approaches it, whether it's writing, primacy versus recency. We all have these little ways to put this data in our head, and then the art is processing it and figuring out what's important. How many hours do you think you dedicated to this process, if you know?
It was more than 200. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like I was in a slightly different place because of my age and my removal from school, that I thought I needed a little bit more time.
When's the
And
last
I'm
time you
glad I
took?
took it.
When's the last time you took a test like this? The bar exam?
1993.
So I assume you only took the test once, if I can ask.
I did.
So that after you took it, did you have confidence, or did you think you failed it? What was going on in your head?
So that's a very interesting question. The moment I was finished, I thought, wow, that wasn't so bad. And then every day afterwards, I started rehashing it in my head, and oh my God, I should have said this and I should have done this. I spoke with some other people who had taken it. We saw different things in the essays. So you do ruminate, and there's such a long period of time that you're waiting for the results. It allows you to ruminate quite a bit. So as I moved further from the actual test day, I felt less and less confident.
And then May 31st came, right? And how'd you find out?
So this was a great story. I was actually sitting in Jeff's office when the email came through, and I was so happy that I was with him when I got the information, or the result, that he was there to share that moment with me. And it was such a sense of relief, because I was already kind of internally gearing myself up for, okay, I need to start doing this again. What's this process going to be? I think I would have approached it slightly differently. Again, certain subject matter, spending a little more time. But I wasn't looking forward to doing it a second time. So relief would be the first word that comes to mind.
And this test has like a bad reputation for such a low passage rate. Nine folks passed this year, and that's a pretty big number. Now that you've put the effort in and you've taken the test and you know the results, do you think it's fair?
I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's insurmountable. I think it's difficult. I think it's just an enormous amount of information. And to me, the biggest issue is the time constraints. I legitimately was answering and finishing answers to my essays as my timer ran down. So I had to move really quickly through the multiple choice and short answer, because I wanted to make sure I had as much time as I could on the essays. And I never had the chance to go back and kind of double check my answers.
Probably a blessing.
Maybe, but listen, the manner in which those questions are asked are very precise. And if you're going through it quickly, I'm sure that there were things that if I had read it it slower, or again, I may have picked up on the nuances. And nuance is a word that I heard so many times from other attorneys, that the test is on nuances and nuances. And I truly believe with the multiple choice and the short answer that that is true. But to me, the greatest difficulty was the time constraints. I would love if the Florida bar issued full practice tests that people could take under time conditions, because I think the uncertainty and the nervousness of just the test itself, if people had a greater comfort in the test taking, that may provide a greater success. You know, I remember when I was taking the bar exam, that was one of the things we always did, was take it under time conditions to make sure you could get through it. So I think a lot of the hype is the uncertainty and the not knowing. And I think that's why there's also a greater pass rate for people who've taken it another time, because they've now had that experience and they know what to expect.
Yeah, I only took it once too, and I was really grateful, but I was totally planning to take it a second time.
Right.
You know,
No, but grateful
and-
is a good description, to only have to do it once. Yes.
yeah, and I don't think I was ever as smart as I was the year I took board cert. Just, you know, the amount of effort that takes.
I agree. I said, and I truly believe that even if I had not passed, that was a moment in time where I knew more information than I ever had in my entire career.
And I think it's important to know the test is not just about memorization, these nuances that you discuss. It's really knowing how it all works together and on a much higher level than just, you know, memorizing factors. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Do you have any other tips you think our listeners may benefit from if they're thinking of taking this test?
Start early, take it seriously. Give yourself a break if you need to take a day off or a weekend off, because if you've given yourself enough time, you have that ability to step back if you need to. Sometimes it's hard to sit for hours and hours and hours at a time and study. You kind of feel like a toddler with your attention span. So if you have that many months, you know, just spread the tasks out over that time and you can do it. It's possible.
Well, Abby, we are so proud of you and thank you for
Thank you.
your generous time today. And board cert helped me out in ways that I didn't understand at the time, but you'll see there's only 260 something board certified family law attorneys in Florida, and to be in that little club, I think demonstrates that, you know, you're you're taking your job very seriously. I mean, why not try to be the best at it? So everybody.
And thank you, Eddie, for doing this, because I really believe that this information should be imparted to test takers early to allow them to have the choice and the knowledge to begin early if that's something they want to do. So thank you for what you do.
Of course. Well, we will get this segment out to the public, and for all those test takers out there, good luck. And
Yes,
Abby,
good luck.
thank you for your time.
All right, have a good one.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next tip for board certified test takers, the one and only out of Orlando, moved to South Florida, we have Meghana Saoji. Did I get that right?
Meghana Saoji.
Thank you, Meghana. Meghana.
Megan with an A. There you go.
Meghana. That's such a cool, unique name. Welcome to our little show, and congratulations on being one of the 9 who passed this year's board cert test. How do you
Thank
feel?
Shocked, but happy.
So can I ask you if this was your first time approaching this test?
It was my first time approaching this test. Yes.
And you had 10 years in, and your 10 years of lawyering, were those all like family law years, or?
Yeah, I've exclusively practiced in marital and family law since I graduated, and it'll be 10 years this September.
Oh, congratulations. And you're part of a great firm down there with, folks like Ray, and I know Paula real well. I've
Oh,
done
okay.
a few appeals with her back in the day.
Oh, how about that?
So congrats. When did you figure out you were gonna go down this crazy path of board cert?
So my story, I don't know if it's all that different from many, but I really didn't have any intention on ever taking this test. One of my partners, Megan Clary, has always been very big on being board certified, and that was going to be something good for our firm. So she sort of paved the way. I think she became board certified in 2020. And because I just happened to qualify with the amount of trials and whatever you need to do in order to submit an application, I threw in an application just because I thought I would qualify. And then I didn't really think I would sit because mentally I wasn't prepared to study and take the test. I don't know. I just sort of decided if they let me, maybe I'll do it.
So did you pass clearance before you started studying?
I passed clearance before I started studying, and I guess I started studying later than what most people do. So they gave me clearance just maybe the day before or the week of board certification review in Orlando.
So you
And
started January of this year.
Correct.
And the test is in
March
the end of
10th.
is March. So that gave you 2 months to get ready for this test.
A little less. I think it was a 6-week plan. So when I sat down for the tips and nibbles that they do the day before the review course,
Right.
that was the day I decided I was going to take the test. And so I started studying right when I got back from Orlando.
Okay. And what was the plan that you put into place that night at board cert tips and nibbles?
That panel was really helpful. So I think you get invited if you qualify to take the test.
Mhm.
And it's a host of different people that tell you how they studied and what they did. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to take this test. It's too late. I had sat down with my partners in November, December and said, I'm not in the mood to sit down and study and do this. But then when I heard other people's stories, and at least one other person, Andy Wilson, who I'll give the plug to, said he had been in a similar position where he showed up to the tips and nibbles and heard what people were doing. And he said he was a one-timer test taker and that he just took those 6 weeks super seriously and how many hours he dedicated and what he did. And that sort of matched the way I study. So everybody has a different study pattern. And, so I thought, well, if he could do it and he studies kind of like me, I'm going to get the motivation, or that motivated me to say, all right, I'm going to do it and start budgeting my time. So I looked at the calendar to see, like, can I really do this with work? And said, this is my plan of action. If I do every lunch hour, 4:30 to 6:30 on weekdays and 8:30 to 12, and every weekend for 6 weeks, that gives me enough hours, according to what everybody's saying, to sort of cram in the studying.
So what do you think was enough hours?
I don't know. Well, I was able to do it within 6 weeks, and I sort of kind of did a little math before I got on here. And I think I probably did 200 hours, 250, and it just depended on the day. I mean, so I didn't really take time off of work to do it, but I certainly took hours during work days. I just didn't really physically take time off of work because I hadn't planned on taking the test, so my schedule didn't really afford that. But if I killed myself for 6 weeks because I literally, every waking hour that I wasn't working or I could shimmy and studying, that's how I did it.
That's a pretty intense experience. So how would you go about the studying process? Like, what did that look like for you?
So for me, I mean, my biggest tip is be true to the way you study. So if I'm a person that operates under pressure, so I think the 6 weeks study timeline was kind of good for me. Not everybody operates that way. For me, I really did use those red books that you get from the Orlando board certification, because those give you a really good outline of the way you should approach topics. So my first thing was going to the Florida Bar website to see what are the areas of topics that they test you on, because it's a bunch of things that you maybe as a family lawyer you do or you don't do. There was a lot of things that I don't do that often. So I took each topic that I knew would be tested and lined them up with the red books, asked people for outlines, and use that as my base. And my big study thing, and this was just something that Andy had shared with me that works for me, was I took those outlines and I made index cards through an online app called Brainscape. And that's just something that works for me. So I study by killing myself with repetition and making those, the outlines in question form.
Very visual.
Very, yeah. And so I
And
did.
would you do the flashcards yourself, or would you have people quiz you with them?
I did them myself. I mean, you create the flashcard yourself. And, since the days of law school, when I hand wrote, I'm like, I won't have enough time. But because you can type them out or copy and paste from an outline, I created probably 2,000 or 2,500 flashcards from the outlines. And I would go through them daily if I could, and then pick topics, as I got stronger with topics, I'd leave those alone and pick harder topics. But that was really those red books outline, and then however you study those outlines, that was my big thing. Like, that's what I did. People say, read the green books, do this, read the cases, and that's all good. You should. The green books for me, they were helpful in that it shows you how to analyze a case or the way you should do an essay. But I didn't think that questions were directly plucked from 2022 green book for my 2023 exam. I didn't feel that way.
So you didn't drill down the board cert committee and see what appeals each one of them did?
I paid attention when I was reading. I only did 2022 because I didn't have time, and I didn't do all of 22. I probably got to the November. But if I saw someone's name, I would kind of keep track. But I don't know, not really. So you don't know who's doing what topic. So I didn't do that.
Good. I always hear people say that, and I think that's a little too intense as a study tactic.
Correct. It's too, I think I'm a firm believer of all tests that I've taken. You have to know what the test is about. You have to know how to test. And so a lot of it is strategy. You have so many essays, so many short answers, and so many multiple choice. And so everybody on the panel said the biggest thing was like time management. And so I'm very, okay, this is how, we know that this topic is important because I'll get 30 points here. Multiple choice, maybe not as important because you only get 1 point. So you kind of have to have a strategy to how you study or how you even approach the test. And so that's how I couldn't focus on what committee member did what appeal. I couldn't do that. It's just too much. I can only do what I can do.
And there's so much memorization with all these different factors. How did you commit that to memory?
I'm not a mnemonics person. And so that's what, be true to yourself. I thought mnemonics were crazy. I don't even understand why people do it. And that's just me. If there's 26 time sharing factors or 11 relocation factors, or I'm just going to memorize that there was 11 and I'm going to memorize them in order. And so I handwrite and then I repeat. So I can't be bothered with the mnemonic because that doesn't make sense to me. So I don't study that way.
So when board cert exam came up, do you think that you had stuck to the plan that you laid out for studying?
Definitely. I mean, I panicked. I think anybody, once you start going, I was like, damn, I don't know if my tactic is working. But, my partners were very encouraging through the process, and they're like, stay true to yourself. Like, I'm not a study group person. I never was in law school. So why would I now? And so when there were topics, and again, I was short on time. So maybe if you start studying earlier, which is, I'm not saying don't, you would research and do more case law review to understand a topic. I did that for some topics if I had time. If I didn't have time, I picked up the phone and I would call a colleague that I know or a CPA to say, okay, help me understand business valuations a little better, because I'm out of time and I need somebody that can just explain it to me in simple terms. That worked for me, and that's just, so, if you have a colleague that knows business valuation better than you do, or, a question on alimony, seek out your colleagues, but, don't waste time. So I'm not going to a lunch with you. I'm just going to call you and say, can you give me 30 minutes? And, but again, I was really tight on time.
It sounds like you had a very regimented approach. You had a plan, you executed it, and it paid off.
Luckily, yes.
After you took the test that day, how'd you feel? Did you feel like you had done well? What was going through your head?
I think the day I took the test, I thought it went well. I thought from the horror stories I heard, I felt that I didn't experience that. So I didn't experience the worry of a question, a short answer being this long of a question, and then you didn't have time to read it because you have to dedicate time to questions you can get through. I didn't. So at the conclusion, I thought, okay, that could have been worse. But then as days pass, I'm like, oh, I for sure failed. There's no way, because you start to read things or hear from colleagues, and I didn't think I passed.
So that's an interesting phenomenon that you describe, and it's not unique to you. I think everybody I've interviewed so far, and you're in the number 4 out of the 9. All 4 of you have said, I felt good after the test, and then after that, I felt worse. So that's an interesting kind of arc. And you got the news 6 weeks after you took the test. What was that moment like?
I was shocked.
Where were you when you got the email?
I was in my office. I gasped. Actually, I didn't see the email. Someone texted that had taken the test and said, hey, did you get the email? And so I looked at the email, and even though it says it right there in the subject, I was in such a frenzy. I didn't see that it said board certification test passed. I just opened the email and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't believe it. And so all my partners came running into my office, and everybody was pretty happy about it, because, it was, if you fail, it's okay. Everybody knows you only studied for 6 weeks, but if you pass, we'll all be surprised. So I think we were all kind of surprised.
I think with the passage rate, I don't think, I think everybody thinks they're going to fail. Just odds are, more than half the people do.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing, especially if you haven't taken a real test since the bar exam.
Right.
And
I'd say the panel that spoke, I can only think of one person, but I don't remember. Only one person, Andy Wilson, said he passed on the first time. So it definitely seems like more people than not, it takes at least 2 times to pass. That was sort of my, I'll take it, get my feet wet, and then I'll take it again.
Right. And you were pleasantly surprised.
I'm very surprised. I'm happy. I can purge my brain of all the things I memorized for a little while.
Well, you don't want to purge. You want it floating out there, because it is kind of cool just being able to recall these factors, by heart.
I agree.
And that's something, most attorneys can't do. So just the process of going through this ordeal makes you, really know the stuff not just memorize it, but know how it works and interplays with each other. And because to pass this test, you need more than just memorization.
I would agree. I mean, I think a big takeaway that I kept hearing from other board certified lawyers is that it is a basic competency test. That is what it is. It's not supposed to be the super specialized certification. It's a basic competency test. And so when I approached the essay, and again, because, when you pass, you don't get the benefit of seeing your test. So I don't know if obviously it worked because I passed, but I couldn't say what gained me the most points. But something that was kind of repeated to me from other lawyers was answer the call of the question, answer the obvious things. You think you have to be fancy and point out the esoteric. I didn't. I don't think I said a single case name in any single essay. I didn't do that. I just approached it and answered it really like as if you were in a consult and how you would explain the law to a client. I mean, that's what I did. I don't think I went above and beyond. I just did what was asked of me.
I think people miss the importance of the call to question. And when it comes to these essay questions, you read such a crazy fact pattern. Each one is a crazy fact pattern. And then you get to the call of the question. So I usually go there first.
Yeah.
And before I read, this fact pattern, so I know where they're going and what they're looking for. And now that you've taken it and you've passed, there's a lot of criticism that this is not a fair exam because of the passage rate. Do you think this was a fair exam?
I thought it was a fair exam. I mean, yeah, I've heard the criticism, and I think that there was a higher passage rate this year than years past. I thought it was a fair test. I mean, there was maybe a few questions, not maybe 3 or less, that I was, I don't know what they're asking, and I'll move on. But generally speaking, I felt that it was fair. I also
And
felt that way because I passed.
knock on wood. What tips would you give our listeners that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't know if I have any other tips other than be true to yourself in the study process. So, I did a really kind of rigorous process because I decided late, but again, that worked for me and it was all fresh in my brain when I took the test. But if I got frustrated with the topic, I mean, there were topics where I'd crumple up my outline and throw it and say next topic because I couldn't digest it, and that was okay. So leave a topic and pick something else up so that you're never losing steam. I never just said, I'm not studying today. I mean, rarely, maybe in an evening when I was stressed, I'd say, let me take that break to recover so that I can have a better day tomorrow. So I just kind of stayed true to what worked for me. Again, I don't think the green books, I don't know if it added value to the studying, but I will tell you, reading the green books for me, I was more at peace because my brain wasn't having to memorize. I kind of enjoy reading the cases. If you like being a family law practitioner, it was a nice break and it was fun. It was the more fun part of my studying. So you got to just do what works for you. You can't follow what other people are doing. And honestly, I tune out what other people are doing. That's just, I've always been that way.
So no study partners.
Not really. I mean, I had one friend who passed and she and I spoke a little, but I didn't, we didn't really share outlines and do all that because I can only do what I'm going to do, so when I see what other people are doing, it doesn't make sense to me. So people think I'm crazy because I memorize, like, for example, I knew ethics was being tested. I memorized all of the ethics rules, but that's the way I am. I mean, I was the kind of person in law school studying for evidence and I'd shoot hoops and recite the rules to my friend who's passing the ball. That's the way I functioned. So I took this test the same way I kind of got through law school, and people thought that that was crazy. Did I get a bunch of points on the ethics because I recited every rule that I memorized? I don't know. I don't know if I got a great score or a medium score, but I passed. So that's something that my friend freaked out that I was doing. I'm like, well, don't do what I do because that's just the way I study,
Well, Meghana, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and congratulations. We're very proud of you.
Thank you.
We can't wait to see what you do with this.
Thanks. And so if anybody needs to reach out to me, I appreciated people that did that for me. And so I don't know if this is a forum where people have the ability to now contact you, but I'm definitely happy to help because I would like to see more people kind of follow suit and get board certified as well.
Yeah, I think that's why we do this. And it's amazing how helpful everybody is. I've been doing this program for 3 years now, and everyone who's passed has gladly given their time to this experiment, and it's been a lot of fun. And we'd like to see that passage rate get a lot higher. There's no, why not celebrate being board certified? Because it is like a career epic moment, and that's why we are so proud of you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me to do this. It was a cool process. I'm happy that it worked out. And so I hope this helps people, because I thought the panel I got invited to was the most helpful thing for me to kind of get me started. So hopefully people feel the same way about this clip that you're doing.
Well, Meghana, thank you so much for your time today.
Nice to meet you.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next guest in our board cert tip seminar for 2024 is newly board certified attorney hailing from Naples, Florida, Michael Shemkus. Michael, are you with us?
I am here. Thank you very much.
So congratulations on being one of the 9 who just passed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And the purpose of this program is for me to ask you a bunch of questions on how you approach the test and some tips you have for our listeners. Are you ready, Michael?
I am ready.
So you've been an attorney in Florida since what, 2013, 2014?
No, so I took the Illinois bar in 13. I then took the Florida bar in 14. I practiced law in Illinois through 16. And then I didn't start practicing Florida law until we moved here in 17.
And then you became board certified in 23. So that's as quickly as you can do it. 5 years and you take the test. So congrats on your determination to be a standard of excellence.
Oh, thank you.
So you come to Florida, you're practicing family law. What makes you decide to go the route of board cert?
Well, I certainly was influenced by those around me. I work for Jack Long, Ed Murphy, and they are both board certified attorneys.
AAML dudes, right?
Well, Jack is an AAML dude. And so that was sort of a staple of this particular firm. And so it was on my radar almost immediately. And then it was just a matter of time. I had to wait for the 5 years, and then I had to study for it, and then I took it. But I really credit that to my, bosses, so to speak.
Yeah, an environment of excellence. And did you have a problem with the trial requirements in the 5 years that you were in Florida?
No, because thankfully, I had already kind of started my legal career 3 years in Illinois. I kind of got all the, the drafting and the menial stuff in the back rooms out of the way. And so when I got to Florida, I was kind of pavement in court. And so I didn't have much of a problem getting things satisfied there.
And when did you decide to fill out the board cert application?
So, if I took it in March, I would have filled it out the prior summer. So the summer of 22.
And when did you start studying?
Well, I knew that I knew what my plan was before I filled out the application. So I started a loose study schedule a year in advance, which I know is a lot longer than other people you've had on this program. But I've got, we have a busy practice, so my work days are filled. I've got 2 young girls back at home and a wife. And so I knew I had to space things out. I couldn't just go black on my family, dark on my family immediately for a long period of time. So I charted it out. I created a Word doc and I put the categories, the topic areas, and I gave myself month milestones to work through them. And that worked pretty well.
Did you keep on schedule the whole time?
Nope. I fell off. I fell off about between around the holidays of 22, right? So we were traveling for Thanksgiving, then we traveled for Christmas, and all that kind of study stuff went out the window. So then I had to do some makeup when I got back to real life in January.
Any chance you kept track of how much time you dedicated to the studying process?
I really didn't. I really didn't see the utility of that, so I didn't bother. But I have since then, particularly after watching other segments that you've put on, I've since contemplated, and it was probably anywhere between 100 to 150 hours, sure.
And so the core subjects and the subcore subjects. How do you go about putting all that together and figuring out your study materials?
Yeah, so I had to come up with a plan, and I figured that the bulwark of the plan would lie in the red books. You can see them stacked right up there, right, from the board cert review course. And so my process was, I also had the PDF for that. So my process was, I printed off each section of the red book and I put it in its own binder. And then I would carry that binder around with me in the car, and when I went to appointments or when I was waiting and wherever, and I would always have a highlighter. And I read from the first page through the last page of every topic, and I highlighted whenever I read something that was new or novel that I hadn't really, become very familiar with just in the regular course of practice. And I just kept forging ahead. I did that for a solid year. And by the time I got to the end, I more or less had covered the entire red book. And then when I got into the year of the exam, the 3 months preceding the exam, my process changed a little bit. And then it became taking all of that material and distilling it down to an outline. And so then I scheduled my outlining phases. You know, this week, I'm going to tackle this outline. And then in addition to following the general hierarchy of the board cert exam materials per outline, I then also made sure to sprinkle in the highlighted portions that I had done, so I could hit those again.
That's
And
pretty,
those were first
it's a pretty,
two phases.
that's a cool way to attract yourself to the stuff you may not have mastered. I like it. How did you fill in the gaps of the stuff that's not in the red books?
Yeah, so that was fun. Because there was like,
Subcore.
you know, there was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 subcore topics of things that I had, most of which I had never touched in my career. I haven't handled a military divorce, still have it to this day. It's been 10 years of practice. I've never done, I think I flirted with an annulment once, but it never went anywhere. So there weren't board cert materials for that. And so here's what I did. I read every statute on each topic area, front to back, distilled those down to outlines as well. And then I supplemented that work by getting on to Florida jurisprudence, which was available to me through Westlaw, and then pulling the most salient treatise excerpts from that, and then making sure that what those contained made it into my outline. Now, I will say this to those that may consider doing the same. By and large, there wasn't a whole lot of extra material in the treatise that I didn't already discern from the statute. So there wasn't, it was really just ruling out anything that may have been missing, but it didn't happen often.
So you created your own study materials.
Yep.
Was the outline typed or handwritten?
Typed, everything typed.
And how many people have asked you for that outline at this point?
Well, you know,
it's like a cool commodity.
It's it's right here.
Shemkus on Family Law, Florida.
And it's really not that big.
So
I mean,
each, are those all the notebooks condensed into one, or is that just the outline?
these are all my outlines. Yeah, and I've got them all tabbed per topic area, and they're all here. So it's really not that much.
I love it. But
Yeah.
that's the final product. That's not the data that went into creating those hundreds of pages.
Of course, yes, absolutely.
So that's the product of your 150 or so hours of surviving this ordeal. Were you confident throughout the process, or did you think you were going to have to take this test a second time?
Yeah, so it was funny because up until I actually got into the test, I was very much unsure, because the closest thing you get to having any idea as to what you're in store for are some of the sample materials that the bar publishes, but that's not a lot.
2 questions, right?
Yeah, you've got an essay in there that they give you. There's some short answers, you know, maybe some true false. Not a lot. And I purposefully did not look at those materials until the last week, because I wanted to gauge how close am I. And so for the full year, you know, year, 2 months, I had no idea what the test was going to look like, how hard it was going to be, how specific the questions were going to be, whether they're intentionally set up to trick you. I had no idea. So I was very much in the dark, but it wasn't until I took the sample exam, and then it wasn't until the day of, when I finally got into the materials, that I realized that I should have been more confident.
So I take it to mean you think it was despite all the negative thoughts about the passage rate, did you think this was a fair exam?
Right. So I love that question. I listened every single time you've asked somebody that question. And I don't think that someone who has passed it can answer that question, because we don't see the results, right? You don't get your grade. You don't see which questions you missed. And so I don't know whether I passed by a single point or whether I passed by a lot more. I will tell you that when I finally opened the test that morning and began working through it, I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't feel like there were trick questions. I didn't feel like there was an emphasis on esoteric. certainly there are some esoteric questions, but it's not the primary focus. Most of what you're tested on are core materials that if you practice family law every day, you should be pretty well familiar with.
So that's encouraging for everybody to hear that might be thinking about taking the test. And, from my perspective, I think you got to know everything and you have to know how to apply it. But I agree with you. I don't think it was designed to be a tricky, like gotcha test. I thought it was, some of the short answer and true and false could be, each question that could be kind of tricky because sometimes they're testing the nuances there. But for the essays, you just have to know everything and be able to apply it. And I think that's the good gatekeeper of who's board certified and who's not. So I think it's a very fair process. And I also had the experience of grading the exam for a couple of years. So I saw that side of it. But how interesting is it now to have watched this show and now be on the show, right?
It is
kind of
It's
that's
cool.
kind of a cool path trajectory. What do you think of study groups? Did you do this on your own?
No, I could not have done a study group.
So-
Scheduling it alone would have been horrendous. And I think that, I don't know, I guess I felt like everyone has their own pace and I didn't want to be holding anybody back and I didn't want to be held back in my pace. I just wanted to do it my way. So that's what I did.
Have you taken a test like this since you took the bar exams in Illinois and Florida?
No, I haven't.
So after you took the test, you felt like you passed it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound, a certain way about it, but you're asking me the question and I'm giving you an honest answer. When I left that exam, I could have been, put to a lie detector test and asked that question. And I would have said, yes, I think I passed.
Did those feelings ever change before you got the results on May 31st?
No.
And where were you when you got the results? I love asking this.
Yeah, I was actually on our last day. My wife and I were celebrating our 15th year anniversary. And I had surprised her and my two girls with a week-long trip to Utah. And so we were in Utah and it was our last day there on that trip when I got the news.
And
on the 15th year anniversary date.
that's pretty cool. And it came by email. Did you think it was going to come that way or did you think it was going to be mailed to you?
So that drove me nuts, right? Because I had asked the committee member who had been facilitating it previously, I said, when are the results released? And she had told me the date. And so I had marked my calendar, but I didn't know, and I knew that they would be released by email. I didn't know what time that day. And so there I was in Utah on the day before, staying up late, waiting to see, is some automated email going to push these out at 12:01 a.m.? And the answer is no, it didn't. No, that's not how it works. Someone was manually sending these emails out. I didn't get it till the next morning at 10:20 in the morning or something.
And I mean, what was that feeling like? This is a pretty important moment in your career.
Yeah, like an immense wave of relief. That your hopes, your expectations were correct, that you weren't, blindsided by a surprise. And that's something that I always kind of had in the back of my head is you can feel as confident as you want about something, while at the same time recognizing that you've been wrong before. And I did not want this to be that. And thankfully I didn't have to suffer that.
Well, it sounds like you had a very regimented approach to studying and, by sticking to that as much as you can, you had a great result. So congrats. What, besides the red books, or there in the actual statutes and rules, there any other materials you looked at, like the Florida Law Weekly Green Books or anything like that?
Yep. So I had heard people talk about the Green Book. And so, but I'd never seen it. I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know why people were calling it the Green Book, but it's green and it's a book. So there you go.
We're very
I-
creative here in family law. Red book, green book. It's like
You know,
Dr. Seuss.
that part was that part was among the easiest for me because I'm an appellate decision consumer, right? I subscribe to an online newsletter where I get updates every single week, similar to Florida Law Weekly does. And I read every single family law case when it comes down. And if it changes the law a little bit, I actually make a memo and I send it out to the rest of the firm so that the rest of the firm is always on the cutting edge too. And so I had been in that practice for a year and a half already. And so when I read the Green Book, it was all review. I was reading everything I'd already read before. And
Yeah,
I didn't.
I've been reading opinions ever since I passed, and I passed in 2004. So, yeah, I've been reading these for a while. In fact, I have my to-do pile right behind me. I'm 10 weeks behind in my Florida Law Weekly. So, in addition to filming this, I have to catch up with that. And I think that's A, you're not going to miss anything, and B, you immediately, it's what better review than like keeping your finger on that pulse of appellate law that's consistently being produced every week. And that way you kind of see the patterns that present themselves. Like I see major patterns like no transcript and depleting accounts without marital waste. And, you see these things time and time and again, they're the ripe appellate issues if something like that were to happen in your case. So I think reading those are invaluable to any attorney. And I'm glad to hear that you agree with that. I get mine Florida Law Weekly old school, and I like actually reading it, even though the print is so small these days. I gotta put on my glasses. But yeah, that's the best way to learn, I think, getting it directly from the source.
And
So go ahead.
one of the takeaways from reviewing all of the cases again in the Green Book was that when you do that, consolidated, focused review of all of this material that was published in a year's time, the trends, like you mentioned, jump out at you much more than they would just in the ordinary course of a year's worth of reading. And it was remarkable how bold at least one of the trends was. Domestic violence injunctions, huge in 2022. So many published decisions, and many of them turned on the same issues over and over and over again. And so that was a big flag for me. Hey, before you sit for the exam in next week, maybe go back to the injunction section of your outlines and read it again.
I think those trends are much more important than researching the cases that the people on the certification committee were involved in. And I hear people diving in that deep. And when I was on the committee, I kind of chuckled that, people were doing that because that's not how the test is written. And I don't think that's the way to go. But looking at these trends, that's the important stuff of if something is constantly showing itself, or if something has changed in, by 12/31 of the year before you take the test, because you don't have to know the law after that. I think, whenever I see something like that, I'm predicting that's going to be a short answer or true and false question on the next test.
And you mentioned this this kind of fallacy of diving down into what the members of all that kind of stuff. There were three things that I did not do that I've heard others say. Right? I heard that. I didn't do that. If I had time just to spare to play with, maybe, but that's not how real life works. So no, I didn't bother with that. I created mnemonics for factors under, marital assets, non-marital assets, unequal distribution, that kind of thing. And I even studied them for a little bit, never used them at the test at all.
How'd you memorize all those different relocation and alimony factors?
Well, the reality was, my experience on the test, the essays didn't really require a recitation or a regurgitation of all the factors on a given issue. There was one case that did, and it called for an unequal distribution analysis. And I was familiar enough to recall most of the factors. But the rest of the essays, they didn't really require it. They didn't call for it. And I didn't engage in that kind of thing. And then the third thing that I didn't do, which I kind of mentioned in passing before, was I never summarized the case law. I didn't think that, first of all, I felt like that was completely overkill, because that would require so much work in such a short amount of time if you were doing it within the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't think that would have been a time well spent. I think that if you are in the habit, like you and I are now, of reading the cases as they're published, and you're doing this before you take the exam, if you think that your memory will be served by making case summaries along the way as you go, I suppose that could be manageable. But I definitely would not tell anybody that you need to summarize the case law from last year for this exam.
What about your use of case names in answering questions? Did you
Very
use-
few. I probably dropped about 3 case sites in the whole thing.
Yeah, they don't really help you, and if you get them wrong, they hurt you. So
Yeah, and it didn't. Again, the prompts that when you finally sit down and you start seeing what's being asked of you, you start to realize that it's not screaming technical perfection at you. It's here's a fact pattern, like every fact pattern that walks in our door, and go, right? Give me your best summary of the process of analyzing this, the conclusions you would draw, the applications of law you would make, and just go. And that's all I did, and thankfully it worked out.
Well, Michael, any other tips you have for our listeners that might be valuable to them if they're considering this path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think give yourself plenty of time. There's no rush, right? There's no gold star for starting studying 2 months before the exam and then nailing the exam. No one really cares about that. So give yourself plenty of time. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be miserable unnecessarily. And just be deliberate about it. Be mindful of it. You don't have to be perfect along the way, but at least give it its due attention. And then the day of, make sure you slept.
What do you think of the remote test, doing it from home?
So there were pros and cons. The pros were I got to be in a comfortable space. The attorneys next door, they gave me their space to work in because our law firm was going to be busy and hectic. And that was very nice of them. And that was very nice to take the test in a quiet environment without any interruptions. The cons were there were some scary glitches that happened with the software, and there wasn't anybody to call, and it got very stressful a couple times right before a segment was going to start. And I didn't like that. I definitely felt like that was a bit of a disservice to the test takers who had poured themselves into being prepared for this, only to be almost failed by the software that they're relying on. I didn't like that at all.
User error or system error?
Definitely system error, because 2 out of the 4 segments I managed just fine. The issue was that they would send you a code via email about 10 minutes before each segment. There's 4 segments, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. And so you had to sit there and wait until 10 minutes before the next segment. And then I'm staring at the inbox, and the first segment worked fine. I got the email, got the code, plugged the code into the software, and it booted up fine, no problem. The second segment, no code ever came. And that's kind of terrifying. And so at about 5-minute mark before the next segment was supposed to start, I emailed, the administrator, and I said, "What's the deal?" And she said, "Well, all the codes had gone out." And I said, "I didn't get one." And then I didn't hear back right away. And so I frantically started pressing buttons in the software, and I managed to activate it without needing the code within 1 minute of the segment starting.
Wow.
And then this happened. So then the third segment after lunch, I did get a code, but then when I inputted the code, you get the spinning wheel of death, right? And I had to override my laptop, do a hard reset, turn on, unplug it, reset it, reload the software, try it again. I had to do that 2 or 3 times for that third segment. And again, I got in just within a minute of the next segment starting.
Wow.
No one should have to deal with that.
You're going to give everybody anxiety nightmares.
Well, no, I hope that someone hears this and then, does something to fix it for the next batch.
Well, that's every year is a little different. When I took it in blue books, and you had the option. We all went into one room, like the Florida bar exam, and everybody taking board cert, not just family law. So you were in there with everybody. There was another room for computers. I was terrified because I heard nightmare stories of it taking over your computer and locking it up. So I wrote my test, old school with a blue book. So I think every year you have issues that you have to deal with in such as life, and at least it got your heart beating and focused you, and hopefully you use that for good stress instead of bad stress. But
Well,
like
well, let me suggest this to those who I may have just freaked out. Before the exam day comes, reach out to the administrator who has been communicating with you and say, what's a phone number I can call if there's a technical emergency? Because I think that's a really easy fix. Because, for example, it could have been the case that the segment was not going to start until I logged in. I didn't know. They told me what the time was supposed to start, but I didn't know whether that's a hard time or a soft time. And had I known that, I would have been okay. I mean, okay, let me call, I'll talk to the person, we'll figure this out together. And if it's 10 minutes past the start point, if it still means I get the full 90 minutes to take the next segment, everything's okay. So I would just encourage people to talk to your administrator ahead of time and just say, hey, what's the plan if something goes awry?
that might be the best tip of the show.
Yeah.
So Michael, thank you for your time. Congratulations. We appreciate your enthusiastic participation in this, and can't wait to see what you do with this board cert. Congrats.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next guest for our board cert review seminar hails from Fort Walton Beach. Ladies and gentlemen, with us now, newly board certified attorney, Michael Goodson. Michael, are you with us?
I'm with you, Eddie. Thank you.
Congratulations on passing this career epic moment defining issue and being one of the 9 that are now board certified as of 2023.
Well, thanks, Eddie.
So you've been practicing, what, about 10 years?
I got my license to practice in 2014. My first 2 years was an assistant state attorney in Panama City. Then in 2016, I started doing family law full-time and have been doing family law full-time since then. So about 7 years of just family law.
And what made you decide to go board cert track?
As a full-time family law attorney, I got to know a couple of other board certified attorneys in our area, as well as attending the review course and the AAML Institute. And to be honest, I just saw that as kind of a necessary step in my career to become board certified. The first time I took the exam was in 2020, which I think would have been the first year I was eligible to take it. Did not pass at that time and told myself, hey, I'm just going to keep trying until I do it. Because of COVID and everything that was going on, I did not take it that next year. So I've only taken it twice, one in 2020 and then one in 2023 when I passed. But yeah, I mean, to me, it was just something that when I made the decision to be a family law attorney, and knew that there was this credential out there to say that I was, you know, a specialist and had some level of expertise in that area, to me, it was just kind of a no-brainer to try for it. And as somebody that's at the, I hope, beginning end of my career rather than towards the tail end, you know, I saw that as being something that was helpful for me as a younger attorney with prospective clients, as well as with other attorneys and judges, that, yeah, man, there's no downside to doing it other than the involvement and investment of preparing for the exam, taking the exam, going through the process of having to do all of the case histories and fill out the application and get recommendations. But yeah, to me, it was just a necessary step.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy way of looking at it, because most people don't pass their first time, and having that expectation is kind of creating this negative aura about the test. And after you took the test in 20, did you do anything to see why you didn't pass? Did you look at the results?
Yeah, I did. So when I took it in 20, COVID was just starting. So the exam was March of 20, and COVID hadn't really come to our area. I remember at the exam, there was one person wearing a mask, and I thought, boy, that's weird. Why is this person wearing a mask?
How things change. So that was probably the last year they had it.
Yeah,
it wasn't
yeah.
remote.
So then the review process that year was by Zoom, where they let me look at, I think, my exam answers as well as the grading and score sheet. So like if an essay, I think, is on a 1 to 6 scale, hey, on this essay, I got a 2, and I could look at my answer. I don't remember if they gave a model answer at that point, because it's been 3 years. For the multiple choice, it was, hey, here are the 20 or 25 questions, and here's how many you got right, here's how many you got wrong. And then same with the short answer, you know, here's where you got points, here's where you didn't. So it was helpful for me to at least see what my score was, and then what I needed to do to get it to a passing score. And where that was helpful for me is I knew how much time I had put into studying for 2020, which was nowhere near the amount of time that I put in for 2023. And part of that was not that I intentionally understudied, but I knew it was the first year that I could take it. I'd been practicing for less than 5 years in family law. I really had no expectation of passing it. Not to say I didn't care, but I knew I could take it again, and I had my whole career ahead of me. So I went into it with very low expectations and very low pressure on myself. And I got to see, hey, I didn't do as bad as I thought. I was, you know, a puncher's chance away, or a couple questions here or there, from getting close to a passing score. So then when I was preparing for 2023's exam, I had left my prior firm in September, October of 22, came over to a new firm, brought very few cases with me, so I had time on my hands. And I talked with my wife and made the very conscious decision of, hey, while things are slow and I'm kind of getting up to speed at my new firm, all of my free time, I'm just going to devote to studying. So I took the red books that come out every year from the review course. I got them in PDF. I put them on my iPhone. And if I had 5 or 15 minutes, I would just read. I made the plan of at least 30 minutes a day. However, I divided it up to do 30 minutes a day of studying. Sometimes I was able to do that in a 30-minute chunk. Sometimes I'd keep going and do 45, 60, 90 if I was just in a good mood and something was interesting and I had the time and kept doing it. Other times there are topics that are just really dry and it's a slog to kind of get through. So I would break those up or do a little bit of studying at home, walk the dog, play with my kid, do dishes, do some other chores. And so by the time the exam got here in March, I was able to read through all of the prior year's books. So let's say I took it in 23, so I studied 22's materials. 23's stuff comes out in January for the exam in March. And I did not get through all of the red books from January's course, with there only being about a month and a half. I did the best that I could, and I focused on some areas that I wasn't as familiar with. But I found that just by doing the prior year's review and then attending the course every year and reading Florida Law Weekly when it comes out, that yeah, I mean, that prepared me enough for the exam.
Any other materials besides Florida Law Weekly and the Red Books that you, and the statutes that you looked at?
Honestly, no. I know some people have reviewed, I think it's the Abrams material that's in a gray bound. Everybody should know what I'm talking about there. I've looked at that from time to time, but I did not study it. I really just focused on the review books, Florida Law Weekly, because I get the weekly emails, and I got your squibs as well. So those are helpful. And then reading through, chapter 61 and paternity and domestic violence and chapter 751, reading through the statutes that would be covered. When I studied in 2020, I focused first on the statutes. I read through all of those and then didn't do as much of the red books. This time I kind of flipped it, that I focused more on the red books and did not read all of 61 cover to cover. I think I went through like the parenting factors, alimony, equitable distribution, kind of the big stuff, but didn't really get lost in the weeds on it. Same thing with Rule 12, the rules of family law procedure. I selectively read through that, but I didn't read through it cover to cover because to me, the relevant stuff was contained within the red books. And I just remember taking the exam, just feeling kind of fortunate. There were some questions on the exam where I had cases that were very similar to some of the questions. So I kind of researched those issues ahead of time. So I felt pretty comfortable on it. But yeah, I remember hearing people talk about studying and making flashcards or doing outlines. Even in law school, that was never my way of studying. I was just hey, let's read the materials. Let's think about it. Let's digest it. Let's try to mull it over in my mind, talk about it with other attorneys, make sure that I fully grasp it. But flashcards never worked for me. Outlining over and over again is just, for me, it's really boring. I know for some people it's really effective for them. But yeah, man, I think that the red books that come out every year is really kind of the go-to source. The AAML does a pretty good job of preparing those, and those tend to track with what's on the exam.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those statements. And I think you could probably just get by with the red books. That's why they have them there. And everybody has a different learning style. There's no like right way to do it. It's just what works for you. And the cool thing of interviewing everybody who's passed is you hear everybody's technique and style. And it's such a diverse, our minds work so differently. Like I need the visual, I need to write it down for it to get stuck in my head. But it probably takes me longer to learn things than most people. So that's why I do it. Any chance you
I remember from this interview that you did with the last year's folks, seeing, like you just said, different people's learning styles, as well as the review course on Wednesday night of that week. The people that are taking the exam can go to kind of an interview session with the people that passed it for the last year. And I did that when I took it in 2020, and I did that again in 2023. So in addition to this interview, I'd strongly recommend anybody that's going to take the exam to go to that Wednesday night. I think they call it Tips and Nibbles, if I remember right.
Yep.
But again, it's a panel discussion with, I think, everybody that had passed, and you hear about their different studying styles. And I remember some of those people talking about how they studied made me feel a little insecure and nervous of, God, I haven't put in 300 or 500 hours into this. I don't know how people find the time, and kudos to those that do. But then I did hear some people that had passed, I think from your interview, of, yeah, I read the red books and I kind of looked at the statutes, and then I practice this every day. So I'm always researching it, and that's how I studied. And that tended to work more for me. So yeah, you're absolutely right, man. Everybody approaches it differently. Everyone learns differently. And what works for me might not work for other people.
But it's good to hear that, because it validates you if you're not an outliner or a flashcarder. And
yeah,
you don't have to do it a particular way. You have to do it in the way that works for you.
Absolutely.
Do you know how many hours you spent in 23 studying or for the 23 exam?
I really don't know. I didn't keep track of them. I remember, like I said, hearing those people say I did 100, 200, 300, 500, just to me, some crazy number of hours. For me, I try to approach it more as a day-to-day thing, because I find for me, if I have a big project or a big task, seeing it all at once kind of overwhelms me. So if I can break it down into its little component parts and just knock out one thing at a time, that's easier for me. So for me, instead of thinking about, hey, I want to study 150 hours before this exam, I said, hey, I want to do 30 minutes a day. And if I can do 30 minutes a day, I don't know what that adds up to. I'm sure you can figure it out, but said, hey, look, I've only got so many days between now and March, mid-March, whenever the exam date was. I can find 30 minutes throughout the day. And I told myself it doesn't have to be 30 straight minutes. If I have 5 minutes here or 10 minutes here or 15 minutes there, as long as by the end of the day, I've hit my 30, cool, I've checked that box, I can congratulate myself. And then if I decide to go over it, awesome, that's just gravy.
Bonus points.
Yeah, it was bonus points. And to me, you know, on my phone, I think it was the Books app that comes with Apple. It'll track how much time you have that app open. So I could look and go, okay, I've done 19 minutes so far. I've got another 11 I need to find. And I made it, you know, it's kind of silly, but I made it like a little bit of a game. Like, hey, I don't get to, you know, go work out yet, or I don't get to eat a bowl of ice cream or watch whatever dumb TV show. Like, hey, I've got to complete this task. Then, you know, I get my carrot, I get my little nibble or whatever it was to get my little dopamine rush out of it to make it rewarding. Because I don't.
That's a cool way to make yourself accountable.
Oh yeah, for me it works. You know, I don't like studying any more than I like folding laundry or doing the dishes or doing the stuff that we all have to do just as part of day-to-day life. So if I could find a way to trick my brain into making it fun, which really isn't the right word, but the best I can come up with, you know, that helped me.
I remember learning evidence in law school with a video game called Objection, and so that made learning all these hearsay exceptions fun.
That would be a good one.
So can you articulate what you did, how you approached the 23 test differently than you did in 2020?
Yeah, in 2020, my approach was, hey, let's see what the exam's like. Let's study a little bit, you know. But dude, if you don't pass, man, it's no big deal. So I went into it with low expectations of myself, not to say thinking I would fail, but just, man, statistically, I think the average is around 20% or so in any given.
Sometimes less.
Yeah. So I was like, look, I know I've got the odds stacked against me. I had learned that enough people pass their second or third or whatever time, and they go on to be board certified and have great careers. So that didn't bother me. I've known judges that failed the bar exam 1, 2, 3 times and then became judges. So I was like, okay, look, if I fail this, no big deal. So I didn't over prepare for it. I under prepared. And again, it wasn't deliberate. I was just kind of new, still figuring things out, had only been doing family law at that point for 3 to 4 years. So still very green and new at it. And just, you know, kind of approached it like getting in the shallow end of the pool. In 2023, I approached it of, okay, I'm going to study to pass this exam. I want to pass it. My goal is to pass it. I'm not going to beat myself up if I don't, but I don't want to have to take it again. So I'm going to prepare as much as I can. And I was fortunate because back in 2020, I was with a firm and kind of in the middle of things and running a full-time practice. In 2023, I had switched firms and was kind of starting over or starting at a new firm and building from the ground up. So I had a pretty low case volume in late 2022. And I noticed that things tend to be a little bit slower around the holidays in many ways anyway. So I had time on my hands and I've made use of it of, hey, if I've got a free minute, I'm going to study. I even told my paralegal, hey, if you walk by my office and I'm staring at my phone, please don't judge me as I'm asking you to do things for me because I'm not just goofing off, I'm studying. Look, I promise. And then kind of the same thing to my wife of, hey, if we're going to go visit family this weekend, would you mind driving so that I can study in the car and just, read the phone? So that was my approach is I guess I just took it more seriously in 2023, and that, hey, my goal is to pass this. I'm going to do what I can do to pass it.
And it's amazing when you articulate a goal, you manifest it. So
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
I dig it.
Yeah.
So you've seen the test as someone who didn't pass, as someone who got to see the answers, now someone who took it again and passed. So you're probably in a real good position to answer this next question as to, because this test gets such a horrible rap and so many negative things are said about it that it is not fair. From your perspective, do you think that this is a fair test?
Yes, I do. I remember in 2020, there were a lot of questions on there about annulments, multiple questions about annulments. And I took the exam with other people that I regularly practice with. So after the exam, it was, hey, what the hell were all the questions about annulments? Have you guys ever even done an annulment? I think I had done one at that point, and I think I've still only ever done one annulment. So at that point, back in 2020, I felt, hey, I don't know how fair this is, or boy, it seems like all the same, not the same people keep passing, but hey, the people that speak at the AAML Institute and the review course, their associates and partners, those are the ones that were passing. So it was probably just a lot of sour grapes and, hey, I didn't pass it, and trying to make excuses of thinking it wasn't fair. But then in 2023, there were questions on there, and I was like, yeah, that's a good question. I think I know the answer to it, and I knew enough of them to pass. But yeah, I it's interesting. The more I prepared, the more fair of an exam I thought it was. And I think that's probably the best answer, is that on the 2023 exam, I don't remember a single question that I thought was, like, what is this? What are you talking about? I remember a question in 2020 about jury challenges. And at that point thinking, well, we don't have juries, we do for paternity, but when's the last time there was a jury trial in any sort of family law case?
You get to hold the baby up in front of the jury and say, it's his.
Yeah. I made a joke with one of the other test takers that, hey, before we retire, let's promise that we will do one jury trial and do that just to say that we did. I think that bet is still out there. But
Michael, we need to get a paternity trial case against each other.
Oh, buddy, I'm game to do it. Yeah.
Demand that jury trial.
I think that'd be a hoot. But yeah, I really do. I do think it is a fair exam, and look, the more you study for it, the more fair it becomes, because the more prepared you are. The only unfairness that I felt was because I didn't know the answer to something, but if I knew the answer, well, obviously it feels fair.
Cool. Is there any advice that we haven't talked about that you would want someone taking the test to hear?
I don't know that there's anything we haven't talked about, but just to circle back to study the way that works for you. Don't feel like you have to study the way that other people that pass the exam study. I remember being back in law school, there's the group of kids that sit in the front of every single class and raise their hand for every single question, whether they know the answer or not. I was not one of those people. Some of them went on to do really well in their careers, and some didn't, or didn't even go into being practicing attorneys. I remember listening to people through your interview as well as the review course panel, and their study methods are totally different from the way that I approached it. And it worked for both of us. So I would just say that anybody that's taking the exam, take it seriously, but give yourself a little bit of credit that you made it through college, you made it through law school. Not a whole lot of people do that. You made it through the application process, which is not fun to have to fill that thing out. And if you do this every day, you do this every day. And what I found now that I've been board certified for, I guess, a month now, none of us know everything. It's okay to not know things. You know, we get to look stuff up. That's the benefit of doing what we do. It's very rare that we don't have the ability to research something. So, you know, approach the exam the way that you feel comfortable doing it, and do it in a way that you'll actually do it. If you're a flashcard person and you need to do flashcards, do flashcards. You know, just reading it and not doing flashcards isn't going to work for you. If you're somebody that doesn't like doing flashcards or has never done it, don't do that. Do what's gotten you this far in life. You know, it's an exam like any other. You know, the LSAT sucked. The bar exam sucked. But all of us sitting here today listening to this got through the LSAT and got through the bar exam, and we're licensed attorneys. So, you know, you're all capable of getting through it. It's just a matter of putting in the time. And if you don't pass it, try again.
Good words, Michael. Very wise. We appreciate the time you've given us, and congratulations on being awesome.
Well, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate that. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, and I look forward to our paternity case.
Wonderful. Can't wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Goodson.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
And our next guest for our board certification tip video is Jacksonville attorney Jay Henderlite. Jay, are you with us?
I'm with you. Thanks for having me.
Jay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Jay has been an attorney here in Florida since 2011. Started off as a public defender. And Jay, when did you dabble into family, or when did you accept this is something you wanted to do?
Valentine's Day 2015.
How romantic. Is there a story behind that?
There isn't, but it's ironically the day I started my family law career.
It's you have a heart, so that's perfect. And it took you a couple years to get board certified, so that was really quick. You know, if you chose it, you know, in 14 and now it's 23 and you're certified, I'd say you did a good job and you took it pretty seriously.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So we chatted a little bit before we hit record, and I asked you how you found out, and you said by email. And I guess since then your life has been pretty good. I had the honeymoon.
It was a fun surprise because it said they were going to mail the results, and I'd heard from prior test takers that they were notified around Memorial Day. But
Yeah,
I actually was in the middle of a client consultation, and they had sent me something, and I wanted to look and see if it had gone into my clutter, and it hadn't, but that's where I found
So it went to your junk folder.
it went to clutter on Outlook.
So thank goodness you looked, right? And when you saw that, did you have to stop the appointment?
No, I kept my cool, but
Really? I don't think I would have been able to do that. So cool story. So most people are like afraid to take the board cert exam just because the number of people who apply to take it, there's usually not a big passage rate. This year, 9 people passed. I don't know how many people sat for it yet. But what were you thinking when you were doing the application process?
I don't know if I was afraid to take it so much as I didn't want to do the work necessarily, just because I have other things going on. But I did want to get board certified, and I thought about applying. And actually, I started the application last year to take it in 22, but I just procrastinated too long, I think. But I met with all of the local attorneys that have been board certified, or at least have passed the test in the last 3 or 4 years, and kind of got their input about what they did and what they recommended that I do to get ready, and I just followed their lead.
So what were those valuable recommendations?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was start early. I didn't start as early as some people apparently, but I wanted to have all my outlines done, at least outlines from the red books from the prior year, done before start review in January, so I could just supplement them with what was new or what was different or what I might have missed. And I mostly did that. There were 1 or 2 I was outlining on Thursday between the day I got there for the tips and nibbles and the first day, but I got pretty close.
How many hours would you say you put in before board cert?
So in watching your prior videos, I've heard people say 300. What I heard from my local contacts was 100, which seemed more palatable. I probably did 100 plus, less than 150, but I don't know. I didn't keep track of it.
Some people keep track like they're billing a case.
Yeah, I don't
That might
like
depress
bill
me.
hours, and I know that's what I have to do, but I'm not going to do it if I don't have to.
So now that you have taken the test and you know that you passed it, do you think it was fair?
I do. I think it was fair. It's a hard test just in the sense that you have to know a lot, and not only know it, but able to recall it. And it's a lot of things that in practice you don't need to know off the top of your head. But having gone through the process and learned all the information that I learned, it made me far smarter and more knowledgeable as a practitioner than I've ever been before. And if the point of the test is to become an expert, it really did that because, I personally knew that my knowledge of family law and my ability to recall cases, apply rules, just practice at a high level is a lot higher now than it was, say, in January of this year, just because of all the studying.
Yeah, and that's a benefit you get whether or not you pass or not. And a lot of folks that seem to have anxiety about the test, they're going to be a better lawyer if they just buckle down and go through the process, whether they pass or not. And I don't think I was ever as smart as I was the year I passed board certification. And then I
That's
did
really
the
true. And people, I think, focus a lot on the test and whether or not it's, really a test to for knowledge, or if it's, a test to kind of weed out those that didn't study enough. And I think that kind of misses the point. The point is, if you want to hold yourself out as an expert, then you need to really buckle down and focus hard on all of the different components and nuances of practice family law. And the only way to really do that is, at least in my mind, is to prepare for something like that.
Sure. And the amount of memorization that's required, especially, like alimony factors and, how would you get that in your head where you could just recite them? Did you use like phonics or some type of system?
Yeah, I did two things. I did mnemonics for all the factors, but then I also did some online note cards just to kind of help me.
I'm a big note card guy.
So, that was sort of phase one, but I think the one thing I did that saved me probably a lot of time is I realized if I was just going to study note cards and just try to go over in my mind and memorize or say out loud the factors or whatever, that was going to take me a really long time. So I ended up writing a bunch of hypotheticals and going, I think Fox Miller had said something that board cert about, this is how they get you. And so I wanted to think, what could the possible sort of traps be, or the, hypothetical questions they might ask that are sort of tricky. So if I uncover them and then gear essays toward them, that would help me, one, learn the things that I think they're going to test on, and then two, help me just with my memorization, because I'm just practicing answers. I'm going to learn it faster than just sort of saying them out loud from note cards.
Yeah, just the act of writing an outline on a subject helps me memorize it. And, every month I go through all these published opinions and I write out, the holding of the case. And just by doing that, it forces this material to stick in my head. So you looked at the board cert books. How did you get a hold of the core and the subcore areas? How did you know? Did you just rely on the red books, or like what other materials did you use?
Well, I started with red books from the 22 board cert review course and outlined those. And then when I got to the 2023 review course, I did outlines based on presentations and then what was new, just sort of supplemented. And then I got the green books from Florida Law Weekly and read those, did kind of what you just said, read out the case name and the holding for the cases that I thought they would test on, and if they were interesting facts, I wrote one or two words so I would associate that case with that set of facts. I'd heard them say that you don't need case names, but if you put case names in, it may get you an extra point. And I'm pretty good at remembering stuff like that. So I figured that would be an easier way to get a point.
Yeah, but if you get it wrong.
Study more obscure areas of law that they might test on, but it may not be that beneficial to me.
When you were approaching the test, where'd you take it? Tampa?
No, I took it right here.
In Jacksonville. Was it at a hotel?
No, it was at my desk.
Oh, that's a lot different. So you had a proctor watching you at your desk.
Right.
And so you have your camera activated, and are you allowed to leave the screen? What's the etiquette like for that?
I don't think so. I mean, you have to stay looking forward. I remember once I was thinking about an answer and I felt my eyes water, and I went back and said,
You get paranoid.
right. But they didn't say anything. But there really is kind of a time crunch, at least there was for me. So I was really focused on getting the answers on paper, getting them written. So I didn't really have time to worry about looking around or moving, anything like that.
So you pretty much used all the time that was allocated.
I did. I heard somebody say that the first time they took it, they had a lot of extra time and they thought they did well, and then they went and looked and realized they missed a lot of things. And so if you're finished early, you're probably missing something.
I finished early, and then you have this whole second guessing and reviewing, and usually your gut is, for me, my gut is usually right. And if I think about something, I usually talk myself out of the right answer. So I was kind of tortured having some extra time because I didn't know what I should do. So
I didn't have a lot of extra time anyway. I did have enough time, I think, for most of the sections to kind of go back and look. And there were a few times I would add in what I'd already done. But I don't remember rewriting an answer. I do remember, I forget which question it was, but I wanted to add a line or something about not unless the wife has received substantial assets, but it ended right when I was typing. So it ended with not unless the wife has received substantial ass. Hoping that made somebody laugh.
Some implants or something. You got to come down to South Florida. That's where it's like a reality here.
Right.
Welcome to Miami. So like, is this something you would recommend to other people to do? And if so, why?
Absolutely. I mean, I think more than anything, what I got out of it was it made me a better lawyer, a better practitioner. Just forced me to really learn all of the aspects of our area of practice. There are a lot of lawyers, and I used to be one of them, where you know enough to be dangerous, and what you didn't know, you go and look it up and pull cases, and that's all fine. And a lot of people are successful doing that, but there were a lot of things that I thought I knew that I didn't actually know, or I wasn't doing correctly. A lot of rules that are useful to know and implement. And also there are a lot of things that other people do, or that the judges sort of accept as status quo that aren't really what we're supposed to be doing.
And things always change. It's
And
rules
things
are.
always change.
My board cert test probably looked a lot different than yours.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next year.
But I did mine in a blue book. So that's when they summoned us to one location in Florida, and we all sat and they mixed us with other people, other board certification sections. So the person next to you wasn't taking your test. So there's no cheating opportunity. And back then, typing on computers was a new thing. And people were scared of that because their computers were getting locked up. So I did my board cert test in blue books, like law school, but that was back in 2004. So it's been a couple years, and technology, and now look at what Zoom has done to our industry and electronic filing, and there's so much change happening. But the test is still hard, and there is still kind of a low passage rate. So the fact that you made it on your first time, huge kudos to you, Jay. Good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So
I think I would make it on my first try. I totally expected to.
Yeah, that's like a good expectation to have, that you're just doing this to learn the test. That's what I did, and I was surprised to pass it my first time too. And I had the benefit, I was 5 years out of law school when I took it. So having that board cert really helped establish myself. So Not only do you have to pay more in your malpractice insurance, but you get some benefits too. Have you seen those benefits? Is your phone ringing a little more yet?
Yeah, I don't know if it is or isn't. I mean, it's only been
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Well, I did see your website, and you do have everything properly branded. So,
to do that.
but you earned this. So, congratulations, Jay. Any other tips you can think of that might be helpful to folks thinking of taking this exam coming up or sometime in the future?
One big thing I'd say is just know yourself and trust yourself, because a lot of people will give you different expectations about how many hours you need to study, or
Yeah, 300. I did not study 300 hours.
but, you know, to me, 300 it wouldn't have been worth it. And even if I did 100 one year, didn't pass it, then I'd already had the outlines done. I can do what 50 the next year. So I'm a big fan of working smarter rather than harder, just because
Yeah, but everybody has their
I like having
way. Everybody has
Exactly.
their way of learning too. So,
and of course, people also sort of like to, I think, humble brag a little bit. I studied 300 hours, which is great for them.
I don't think that's a brag. I went into the mountains, locked myself in a cabin, and came out 3 months later.
But the point is, it doesn't have to be something completely crazy. I mean, I didn't lose really any revenue when I was studying. I was studying weekends, and I did have a 4-day trial that ended up getting continued, which was good. So I had some extra time that entire week to kind of study and supplement. But it was doable. It wasn't the most fun I've ever had in my life, and there are probably things I would rather have been doing, but it was worth it. And I definitely got a solid return on the time I invested.
Do you want to give us?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom. And again, congratulations on this epic career achievement.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
Hello, and our next board certified attorney hails from Jacksonville, Florida, and she works with Ashley Myers, and her name is Autumn Lee Graham. Autumn, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm great, and I want to congratulate you on board cert and all the other cool things going on in your life. So
Thank you.
congratulations. And board cert is huge, and you did it after just being an attorney 8 years, right?
Correct. So once I was able to, I kind of started gearing up to do that.
Well, let's talk about that, and maybe our listeners can glean something that works for them based on your journey. I know your boss, and I know she's very gung-ho on board cert and the process. Was that like instrumental for you to go on this path?
It was. So Ashley Myers, she's board certified and with the Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers as well. And so she's very big into adding new lawyers and into both areas as one way to preserve the practice and to make sure that we are practicing in a way that reflects good candor and professionalism at its core. So she was instrumental in telling me that, hey, you need to do board cert, and I was like, oh, I'll just wait. And she was like, hey, you need to do your board cert. So I got the polite nudge to get it going.
So when you're in a legacy office like that, I don't know if it's more pressure or if it's more helpful to have that kind of assistance.
There's definitely pressure, but Ashley's, if anybody knows her, she's very easygoing. So her approach was, if you have to take it twice, you take it twice. If you take it once, fantastic. And so I only did take it once, but having a boss who wasn't pressuring me to just get it done, but kind of was more of ease, and that allowed me to approach it with less stress on my brain.
So at what point did you make the commitment to do this, and what steps did you take to get ready?
Right. So I don't recall the application deadline itself, but I know that well, as far as what point, I knew I was going to always take the board cert. So actually, probably even 5 years ago, I had printed out the application. And what I would do is every time I had a trial, I would put it in the application and I would write it down so that I don't forget it. So that way, when it did come time where I was eligible to apply for the process, that I already had my cases and names and in the big bulk stuff filled out in the application, handwritten, and I just typed it all in and updated it. So I committed to doing this years ago, but as far as actually sitting down to take the test, I decided that I was going to do that probably about 3 months before the deadline. So accomplishing the completion of the application itself was something worth celebrating. And so once that was in, as far as a timeline of studying, I started outlining the red books in November. And then I was very lazy with it. I'd be like, okay, Saturday hits, let's try to outline. And I would not outline every topic. I would outline based on the topics that were posted on the board cert that are going to be tested. And I would add more detail to topics that I thought were going to be on the test just because they're, detailed topics or they're topics that they have to have them there. And then when I went to the review course in January, they have a certs and nibbles, which is where you sit down with other people who have taken the board certification test and they scare you into feeling as if you're not prepared. And so from that point on, then it was definitely full speed ahead and outlining all the time and studying after work and that kind of thing.
So what other materials did you use besides the red books?
Yeah, so in addition to the red books, I used what they call the green book, which you've probably heard on this video, but it's the Florida Law Weekly. They put out all the cases that have been done for the year. And sometimes you might need to reach out directly to them to get a copy of it if it's kind of like in the publishing works or something like that. But I utilized the green book. And that was really after fear from the certs and nibbles, because everyone was talking about this green book that I did not have. So I ran to go get it. Ashley actually ordered it and it was at my office on the Monday after. So that was fantastic because I do have that support being in a legacy office.
So did the cert nibble experience, you said it scared you. Do you think that was like necessary or do you think maybe a little too much?
It was necessary because I think it provided you the background to understand how in-depth the test was going to be. I'd heard the whispers, but Ashley had taken it a long time ago. We have some new board certified attorneys here in the Jacksonville area, and I'd spoken to them and they had talked about it being in-depth. So I really approached it as another bar exam. I'm licensed in Georgia and I got that licensing after my Florida licensing. So I did that only, I think, like 4 years ago. So I kept thinking back to what did I do for that prep. And so I kind of understood that it was going to be detailed, but I hadn't kicked it into high gear the way that I had for bar study by any means. So that certs and nibbles was necessary to kind of say, okay, like it's time to do it.
So after you get that kick in the butt and you got like 60 days to go, what does the new regimen look like in studying and getting ready?
Yeah. So, and I did this all while 7 months pregnant, so it's completely possible for everyone. But it looked like for me after work, I would look at my materials for an hour or 2 hours. That would be like my Monday through Friday, just to make sure that I was fresh and just not reciting things. I finished my outlines. So I think going into the certs and nibbles, I hadn't completed all my outlines. I was very lax about it, but I made sure to finish all of those. And so I would do that on Saturdays and Sundays. So I just completely would block off the day and just get into that. And then once my outlines were completed, there were some topics that I needed to hone in on. So I did flashcards for those. So I'm very big on physically writing things down and then looking at them again. So I would do a lot of physical writing instead of typing. and I wouldn't do the copy paste because it just kind of helped me. It was an extra step. So then it would be flashcards, and then back to the outlines kind of through the week. And then the week before the board cert, I took off. So I didn't work that week at all. And I just started running fact patterns. So I actually went online and looked up like Barbary or like, bar exam type of prep questions that were family law related. And even though they weren't necessarily just for Florida, I needed to get familiar with typing to the speed that is necessary to be able to answer the board cert questions, because there needs to be a high typing speed and you need to put out quality. So just getting into the rhythm of typing, I would utilize other bar exams or test questions that I was able to find online, and then check my answers against my outline to make sure that I was hitting the points.
Is there any way you can quantify like how many hours you set aside to study for this beast of a test?
I hate this question. And they ask this question at the Certs and Nibbles. And I hate it because it seems really daunting for people who are just now starting, or wherever they read, you know, they pull up the video and they're like, oh crap, she spent blank amount of hours. But I can say that in the week leading up, it was 60 hours. I know that starting in November, it was at least probably 5 hours a week. And then I really geared it up in January. So I can't quantify it, but I know it's in those high numbers that everybody else who has quantified it is doing, because I'd gotten those high numbers at the Certs and Nibbles, and then I started freaking out, and I kind of mirrored that type of commitment as well. So just in the week leading up, I know it was 60. So count back 8 weeks from that.
And now that you've passed, congratulations. Do you think all that work was necessary for you to pass?
For me, yes. And it's not because I needed to know the material, but I get anxious. And so personally, doing all of that on the front end allowed me to be very calm during the test. Do I think I needed all of that to pass the test if I didn't have anxiety? No. Because a lot of it you learn through the course of your practice. If you're attending the review courses annually, if you're keeping yourself up to date on your case law and you're really committed to the practice, it's going to click. Oh, I remember I read that case, or, oh, I just had that issue. I just put that in a brief, whatever it is, it's going to click. But for me personally, when I was taking the test, I very much was like, okay, I have this. And I had complete ease, which is nice because you don't want to start your first essay and then be like, oh my God, I had no idea what that was. But each time I hit an essay, I very much knew that I had met the marks, and then I talked to somebody else who's passed and on this video after. And I was like, did you hit this? Did you hit that? And he and I both hit them all. So that kind of was that peace of mind.
So those discussions usually freak me out, because that's where you realize what that was on the question. And so I would like avoid those conversations because they would mess with my confidence.
Yeah, I don't do those conversations beforehand. So I know some people, they're like, well, what about this? Did you hear about this new law? I don't do those because then I freak out beforehand. But afterwards, once it's out of my hands, then I have my, aha moment. So
did you use any study partners or any assistants besides Ashley?
So I actually didn't use Ashley for studying at all. We both we're busy. And so trying to get us both aligned at the same time is quite difficult. I kind of more so used her for like the motivation to get it done, and for the resource of, hey, do you think I need this green book? And her sending it that way. But as far as study partner, Jay Henderlite was kind of my go-to in that regard. And he would prepare questions. So and then he would run through some outlines as well. So he would give me the questions that he had prepared that I hadn't seen before, obviously. And then if I found a resource online, just something, some bar put on a CLE or something like that, and it was available online, I would forward it over to him, or we would kind of talk about some nuances of certain things that were catching us on the UCC JEA. But we didn't have a committed study schedule, but also in law school, I didn't study with anyone either. So I didn't go too far outside of what I know worked for me. But it was wonderful to have him as a resource to bounce ideas off and to kind of confirm my understanding of certain things that were catching me.
Yeah, that's like why we do this, is because everybody's mind is so like wildly different in how we learn. And it's, one person's approach is not going to necessarily work for you, but if you hear everybody's approach, you might pick up things that resonate. So thank you for participating in this great experiment. And the experiment is try to get like the passage rate a little bit higher, because there's a lot of criticism. Like this year, only 9 people passed, and the pass rate is usually under 10. Now that you've taken and passed, and you put all this work in, do you think it's a fair test?
It is a fair test. It is. The only criticism that I would have about the test is the timing aspect of it. So it is a time-sensitive test, and I can't emphasize that enough. So get with your typing skills fast. That's the only criticism, is there's simply so much information that they're seeking, and you can't complete it all in the time frame. And I'm fairly young and I'm a typer, but a lot of times the clock would end in the middle of a sentence. I think 90% of what I wanted to say was in the box, which is fantastic. But if the goal of the test is to, weed out attorneys and to make sure that we have the best attorneys practicing and a solid knowledge base is there before we, call them board certified. And so if that's the goal, then maybe a little bit more time, so that people who have the knowledge base, but maybe not necessarily able to meet the time constraints, are able to kind of get that in there. But in the flip side, I guess it is, if you have to think about it too much, then you don't know it. I don't know, but we're not, the reality is in practice, we have some time to prep for a trial. So.
You have resources, as opposed to the test where you just have to know it. And
Yes.
Everyone I talk to, whether they pass or not, they say the process makes them a better lawyer. So just by doing this, you're going to be a better lawyer. So there's that.
And you can educate other lawyers, and that's wonderful too, because we're only as good as our colleagues, and growing in the practice is something that is essential to our clients.
Well, now that you have overcome this ordeal, and for me, it was an ordeal because I was stressed and it was hard. And so do you have any tips that you think might help other people approaching this and taking the test?
The biggest thing is just do what you've always done. So if you're at this juncture, you've passed the bar before, so do that. Lean on your own skill set. Don't reinvent the wheel. That's kind of one of the biggest things, is don't say, oh, well, I think I'm going to try this new thing that I've never done before. Now is not really the time to do that, unless you take it and you fail, and then you need to kind of reapproach it. But definitely approach it the way that you would approach anything else, and definitely commit your time and energy to it.
So if you're going to do it, you got to dedicate some time to it.
You have to do it. If you're going to do it, you have to do it all the way.
There is no try, as your husband would say. Do or do not.
Don't try.
We're making Star Wars jokes for those not following us. Well, Autumn, thank you for your time and your wisdom. And we're very excited to see where you take this. And we'll be watching you.
All righty. Thank you for having me, Eddie. I appreciate it. Good
All
luck
right.
to everyone.
And that wraps up this year's special for board certification. Good luck, everybody, and hopefully you find this video useful.
Brings us to the conclusion of this quarter's episode of Stevens & Stevens Family Law CLE. Remember, all proceeds from this project benefit the Center for Child Counseling. We truly appreciate your support. We will see you next quarter. Till then, Do something that matters.